Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books, and today is a Victober video. It's a quick Victober video because I'm rushed for time this weekend. Going on holiday, I'm trying to do all my videos for the week early in the morning on a Saturday. But I want to talk about one of the most Victorians you're going to find as a Victorian author, Benjamin Disraeli. He was Prime Minister of Great Britain not once but twice. First for about 10 months in 1868, and then for 6 years between 1874 and 1880. Victorian politics, being what it was and dominated in those later Victorian years, or the second half of the 19th century, by Gladstone, Disraeli becomes Prime Minister first, succeeding Gladstone. And when Disraeli is out of office after 10 months, he is succeeded by Gladstone. In 1880, when he leaves office for the second time, Disraeli is succeeded by William Gladstone. It is a sign of the political times that you can have the same figures in parliamentary life for decades on end. By the time I'd got to the age of 21, I had only ever seen, I think, 3 Prime Ministers: Callaghan, Thatcher and Major. In very recent living memory, I had a bottle of ketchup that saw 3 Prime Ministers, Johnson, Truss and Sunak. To come back as Prime Minister presumably means you're doing something right. So 4 points to both Disraeli and Gladstone. Disraeli was also a personal friend of Queen Victoria. She didn't have to do it, but she created him Earl of Beaconsfield in 1876. It may have been his politics or his winning personality that attracted Victoria to Disraeli, or it may have been his novels. She's a reader of novels, Queen Victoria, and Disraeli was a novelist before he was a politician. Disraeli was a financial speculator before he was a novelist. I'm not entirely sure he's writing novels to keep the wolf from the door. In the 1820s, or the early 1820s, he puts a lot of money into South American mining companies. Not all of it his own money. He borrowed to do this speculation, but this was a sure thing. Nothing could go wrong. Which this most niche of books in my collection is haunting me and inviting me to read it once more. The Latin American debt crisis, the City of London and the 1822 to 25 loan bubble. Well, it was a loan bubble and it was a mining bubble as well, and a lot of people lost their money, including Disraeli. Fortunately, finance was just the first of many careers for him. We know he was Prime Minister, so let's concentrate on his career as a novelist. His first novel, Vivian Grey, from 1826, is what is known as silver fork fiction. These are tales of the aristocracy, stories of great wealth and opulence, read by the aspirational middle classes. Disraeli had some good reviews, some bad reviews. Lots of people enjoyed these books. Critics did not so much enjoy the jibes at the higher classes. And Disraeli gave himself away for not writing in the correct grammar, to which the aristocratic side of life would be using. Disraeli also had some quite pointed portraits of characters who are not named explicitly, but people definitely saw themselves in certain depictions and were not best pleased. But the novel I've read for Victober is Sybil. This is a book published some 20 years later, so 1845, and covers a period of time 1836, 37, around that area, and deals with different classes of people. The subtitle of Sybil is The Two Nations, and the two nations are the rich and the poor. And it is about the story of Charles Egremont, who is a second son of landed gentry going into Parliament. And he goes into Parliament in the 1837 election, which coincidentally is when Disraeli first went into Parliament. 1837, of course, is when Queen Victoria ascends to the throne. I don't want to talk too much about the novel because, firstly, I don't want to give away too much in the way of spoilers, but secondly, because I want to talk about the type of novel that it is, rather than the novel that it is. Sybil is the daughter of a working man, someone who has more noble blood in him from centuries past, and it's basically a Romeo and Juliet story, sort of. Disraeli oscillates between the worlds of the rich and the poor, and although criticised contemporaneously for his depictions of the aristocratic elements, I find in this book those elements a lot more convincing than the plight of the poor. Not that I don't find his writing of the plight of the poor affecting, which is the reason I want to talk about this book. Now you'll have to forgive my pronunciation, but this is a roman à Thesis novel. And I think it's a little bit more of a subgenre than general social commentary within a novel. There's obviously a lot of that in Victorian literature. Dickens is the name that would obviously stick out like a sore thumb there. Disraeli is even more pointed. He is talking about the plight of the poor, certainly, but then Chartism specifically and trade unions. He doesn't stint on the political background. Obviously, he was very familiar with it, being in Parliament at the time that he's writing about. And he gives you a full rundown of the political situation early on in the book. But the heart of the novel is his writing about the plight of the poor. This occasionally can sound a little preachy, but it really works. There is one scene, probably about a third of the way through the book. The wives of miners are waiting outside a shop in order to be served, and the treatment they receive at the hands of, I want to say shopkeepers, but they're not really shopkeepers. They are almost like slave masters. It made me actually angry. The women here don't have money to buy produce with. They are in these monopolistic towns and villages tied to the workplace, and they are spending Tommy or truck wages. This is a system whereby instead of paying the workers, they are given credit to use at specific stores. And from there you fall into the trap of being tied to specific vendors, advances on wages to get additional produce, then ties the worker to be beholden to the employer, to stick with that employer because the worker now owes the boss money. A joint of meat that might cost a shilling at another shop here will cost you 2 shillings because you only have currency that can be spent at this place and you are now a captive audience. This is not something that is particular to Victorian England. This happened in other countries, and I should imagine it still happens in some places. Let's not be too naive about it. But if it's making me angry 180 years later, I don't know how it might have affected someone in 1845. Disraeli is no campaigning author. By this point, he's an actual member of Parliament and has some clout. But here he is campaigning. And that's why I want to talk about the Thesis novel. It seems to be a bit of a balancing act. I'm going to go through some books and see where they might sit on the scale, the pitfalls and the strengths of these books. They're didactic, by definition. They are teaching you something, they are telling you what to think about something. They leave you under no false impression that what they are espousing is either bad or good. So I think you can include a book like Uncle Tom's Cabin, for example. This is, it's a single issue, but it's a very important one. It doesn't have to be about politics. It could be a bit more philosophical as well. I would actually say Candide by Voltaire, or Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, The Plague by Albert Camus. Okay, that's a lot of French authors, but I think they are all thesis novels. It's a very definite philosophical or political framework in a narrative form. I think a book like Nicholas Nickleby by Dickens or Germinal by Zola are examples of books where the author certainly has a message, but the book isn't simply the message. There is something else there. That it has a point of view about a specific subject is not secondary to the plot, but it is not the only thing other than the story that's being told. The problem, the pitfall, the danger of a thesis novel is that it can become hectoring and counterproductive. And to give an example of this, is an author that I don't necessarily endorse. I certainly don't endorse her worldview, but I've read both of these books and I think it sort of fits the model quite nicely, and that's Ayn Rand. Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead. Now these are both very long books. They are both about the same subject. And the one that fails for me is Atlas Shrugged, and that is a pure thesis novel. There isn't much of a story to Atlas Shrugged. There is the same story repeated and hammered into your brain again and again and again for 1,000 pages plus, it seems. And I'm not convinced by the argument. I'm certainly not convinced by the argument, but I've heard it for the 500th time. The Fountainhead is a book written before Atlas Shrugged, before Rand's philosophy is as fully formed as it is in Atlas Shrugged. But it's a more powerful work. It certainly takes elements of her philosophy, but it puts it at the service of the narrative, and it's a stronger work for it. You're reading about the struggle of one man, not the struggle of one man because everyone else is terrible, but it's about the determination and the stick-to-itiveness of our main character. Not that it doesn't fall into the hectoring side of things on occasion. I think there is a court scene where he gives a speech that goes on for pages, and certainly pages too long, and certainly something that should have been inadmissible as evidence in a court of law. But the story works a lot better. It's a lot more convincing in advancing her argument and way of thought than Atlas Shrugged is, because the hectoring, belligerent tone of Atlas Shrugged is counterproductive. It doesn't help that I don't think Rand is looking to do anything that benefits people by her philosophy. Bringing it back to Sybil, Disraeli certainly is. He's a man at this point in his career who knows what he's doing. He's been in Parliament for 8 years. He's obviously been around politics a lot longer because he has tried and failed to win parliamentary seats before he is elected in 1837. He knows which political buttons to press, and he knows how to advance his cause and how to denigrate the opposing political viewpoint. But he's also doing it in a way that takes the aspirant middle classes who are reading his books along with him. And as these aspirant middle classes and aristocracy are the only people at the time who have the vote, he's probably making a political decision in how he's framing that. Sybil is definitely a book that has a reason for being written. I would have to read more of Disraeli's output to get a more rounded view. I think on the strength of this book alone, it is difficult to call him a great novelist. That's not to say that the book is bad, it's just to say it's not great. I think at the same time it would be a mistake to dismiss him as an author. He's certainly an important one. What I don't know, and what I probably should have checked before, is whether he published this book under his own name whilst he was a member of Parliament, or whether it came out under pseudonym. I would suspect it did come out under his own name because that would give additional clout to the argument he is making, but would also have left him open to attack in Parliament. Something to continue reading around and digging into, I hope. But there, like I said, very short video today. It just struck me that there aren't many novels that you can sort of call the thesis novel. And I find it odd that there aren't more books in this subgenre today when our politics are so sharply divided. Perhaps given that one half of the political divide wants to stop there being books entirely, that's maybe not as surprising as it should be. Maybe books just aren't as important as they used to be. I think maybe if you really want to make a difference, a series of campaigning TikTok videos may be your best bet. But until next time.